From the Gulf States Newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm sports and cultural reporter Joseph King, chopping it up this week. On today's show, we hear how people in New Orleans are trying to process the recent terrorism attack and still celebrate festival season.
We looked at each other and we thought, should we? Can we? Is the city going to let us?
And I sat down with our health equity reporter, Drew Hawkins, to learn more about some of the victims and those who survived the attack.
People that aren't letting me be alone right now, even though I might want to be.
That's all coming up on the Gulf States Gumbo. Carnival in New Orleans started Monday, less than a week after a man drove his truck into crowds on Bourbon Street, killing 14 people and injuring dozens more. While the city is in mourning, Aubrey Uhas of member station WWNO reports New Orleans still plan to party on schedule.
Hundreds of people gathered for a vigil Saturday night on the corner of Bourbon and Canal Streets to honor those who died during the New Year's Day attack in the city's French Quarter. The group then followed the band down Bourbon, forming what's known in New Orleans as a second line, stopping at a makeshift memorial piled high with crosses, candles, and handwritten notes. The next morning, another second line snaked its way from the city's iconic St. Louis Cathedral in the heart of the quarter, where Mass had just wrapped.
We pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer.
To a gilded bronze statue of a teenage heroine a few blocks away. Carnival begins on the 12th night after Christmas, which some claim was Joan of Arc's birthday. She's the patron saint of France and saved Orleans, New Orleans' sister city, when the English tried to capture it during the 100 Years' War.
She will be 613 years old on this 12th night, our 17th annual parade.
Amy Kirk du Voisin founded the Crew de Jeanne d'Arc after Hurricane Katrina.
We tell her story, we celebrate French heritage, and we do it in a very New Orleans style.
The crew has held a parade in her honor almost every year since. It's the first of the Mardi Gras season, which anyone who has ever visited the city learns is much more than a single day. Rather, it consists of weeks of revelry building to the ultimate celebration on Fat Tuesday. Du Voisin says after Katrina, people were still recovering and looking for meaning or a reason to stay. And some, herself included, found strength in Joan.
One of Joan of Arc's quintessential quotes is, "I am not afraid, I was born for this."
Now, as the city processes yet another tragedy, Du Voisin says it makes sense to keep celebrating the joy of life, what the French call joie de vivre. Antoinette d'Alteris, one of the parade's captains, agrees. She says the New Year's Day attack briefly threw things into question, but not for long.
We looked at each other and we thought, should we? Can we? Is the city going to let us?
They are. There will be about 1,000 marchers, including Flaming Heretics, Silver Angels, and 2 Joans of Arc, one from France, the other from New Orleans, riding real horses. Alteris says given all the moving pieces, they were already very safety conscious. The parade never goes on Bourbon Street and is family-friendly, which means the crew's members don't drink while parading.
One thing that most people don't know is that we have more security and escorts in our parade than any other parade does in the entire Mardi Gras season, proportionally to our people.
She says they aren't obvious because they're in costume too. And this year, there will be an even greater police presence. Alteris says some volunteers did drop out after Wednesday's attack, but there's no hard feelings.
We respect how you feel and we understand it, and this is what we choose to do.
The Crew de Jeanne d'Arc is set to roll through the quarter later tonight, leading the way for the rest of the Mardi Gras season's parades. For NPR News, I'm Aubrey Uhas in New Orleans.
The Gulf States Newsroom is a team of journalists working with NPR and local public media stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana to cover the issues that matter to you. Email us, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org.
You're listening to the Gulf States Gumbo. I'm Joseph King. It's been just over a week since the terror attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Our health equity reporter Drew Hawkins lives in New Orleans and was one of the first to start reporting on what happened, talking to eyewitnesses, officials, and reporting the latest information as we learned it. Drew, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thanks, Joseph. I'm doing all right. New Orleans is a really tight-knit community, and this has just been really hard. I think a lot of people are definitely still shaken up by it.
I can only imagine, and I know you talked to a lot of people who were there. I'm wondering if you can take me through some of what they said and how they're trying to heal.
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of eyewitnesses, but when I think back on those conversations, definitely one of the most difficult was the one I had with a guy named Tyler Burt.
Cool. Okay, so let me get your name and what do you do?
My name's Tyler Burt. I'm a pedicab driver down in the French Quarter, but I'm also a graduate student at Loyola University.
Tyler is getting a master's in mental health counseling, and we met up in the French Quarter, grabbed a cup of coffee, and talked about his experience. And I have to say, it was really hard to hear. And just a quick warning to listeners, some of this conversation contains some graphic description of the attack. But Tyler was working in the French Quarter, and he had just dropped off his last ride on Bourbon Street, a family celebrating New Year's Eve, and he was ready to call it a night.
My passengers got out, and my transaction was at 3:16, and that's exactly when the car came around the police vehicle, and they ran over her parents and another family member.
Man, hearing that just sounds awful.
Yeah.
And are they okay? The family he gave the ride to.
Yeah, they did survive, but they were badly injured. And 14 people ended up dying, and dozens more were hurt. But for Tyler, what was also really scary was he says the truck could have easily hit him too.
I had actually been high-fiving the father because, we had a high five, and then I believe that he was run over while I was in contact with him. I think I had reached for him even.
Man, I can't really get over that image. The high five.
Yeah, it's just awful. And as the truck sped down Bourbon Street, Tyler says he turned around and he saw bodies flying in the air.
How's he doing now?
Well, since the attack, Tyler says he's really been struggling to manage how he's feeling inside. But he's been able to find support from the community, from friends, and from family.
Some of my thoughts have gone to really dark places here and there, but there's people that aren't letting me be alone right now, even though I might want to be, and that's been really helpful.
I'm glad to hear that he's finding support, and also that his passengers survived. Just so many innocent lives lost.
Yeah, for sure. And his passengers, like many others who were injured in the attack, they were taken to University Medical Center. And that's also where the families of victims and other survivors went to look for their loved ones. And there they would have met with Dr. Erica Rajo, the director of the Seeds of NOLA Trauma Recovery Center at UMC. And she said she was nearly overwhelmed as she got to work early New Year's Day.
I just had a moment of where to start? Where do I begin supporting people? There was just so many people.
I just can't imagine. I mean, as a trauma center in New Orleans, I'm sure they're used to seeing horrible things.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what she said, but she's never seen anything like this before. And her job was to support the families who were wondering what happened to their loved ones. Did they survive? Where are they? I talked to Dr. Robin Gurwitch. She's a professor and psychologist at Duke University Medical Center, and she studies disaster and mass violence. She's actually worked with survivors of events like the Oklahoma City bombing and Hurricane Katrina. She said people who experience trauma need this kind of help beyond just a few weeks. It can be months and even years after mass casualty events like this for things to work out.
And that support can come from so many different places. It can come from trusted friends and family members. It can come from community resources. It can come from our faith and culture communities. There's not a single one point where we get that support, but it is absolutely critical that we do.
I'm glad to hear people do have resources available to them if they need it. What's Louisiana and the federal government doing to help?
Yeah, so they've set up offices to help survivors and the families of those who were killed, and local organizations in the city have also stepped up to help too. And because many of those who were affected were visitors to New Orleans, they're getting connected to support organizations back home.
And Drew, you also spoke to the families of some of the victims, right?
I did, and those were some really hard conversations. I mean, there were just so many young people who were out there that night. Like Kareem Badawi, an 18-year-old from Baton Rouge. I spoke with his dad, Bilal, the day after the attack.
And I sent my son to have a New Year and a party with his friends. And I don't know, man. I mean, what did my son do to get killed?
And they're also Muslim. And with the attacker flying the ISIS flag on his truck, they say what he did just doesn't fall in line with their faith.
I mean, that does not represent Islam, does not represent anything, you know?
Bilal really wanted people to know that his son was just so full of life.
He just loves everything, and he loves sports, and he played baseball, played basketball, he played football.
I think a good way for us to end this conversation would be to take a moment to remember the other victims who were killed in the attack.
Latasha Polk was a nurse's assistant from New Orleans. Her family says she was a loving mother and always had a smile on her face. She leaves behind a teenage son.
Brandon Taylor was a cook at a local restaurant in New Orleans and loved rap music. He leaves behind a fiancée.
Elliot Wilkinson was from Slidell, Louisiana. His little brother says he will be missed.
Edward Pettiford was 31 years old. He was from West London and had ties to the royal family. His family says he was a wonderful son, brother, grandson, nephew, and a friend.
Billy DeMaio was born in New Jersey and grew up in Long Island. He was known as a kind man and a hard worker. He was 25 years old.
Hubert Gautreaux graduated from Archbishop Shaw High School in Marrero, Louisiana in 2021. He was 21 years old.
Terry Kennedy was a New Orleans native and a retired handyman. He spent his free time relaxing in the French Quarter.
Drew Dolphin was 26 years old and a native of Montgomery, Alabama. He graduated from Auburn University in 2023.
Matthew Tenedorio was a native of Picayune, Mississippi. His family says the 25-year-old always had a smile and loved animals.
Reggie Hunter was 37 years old and a native of Baton Rouge. He leaves behind 2 children.
Martin Tiger Besh was a standout athlete from Lafayette, Louisiana. He went on to play football at Princeton University. He was 27.
Nicole Perez was also 27. She had a thirst for knowledge and worked hard to provide for her 4-year-old. She had just been promoted to manager at a deli in Metairie, Louisiana.
Nakira Dideau wanted to become a nurse and worked at a hospital. She was getting ready to attend college. The 18-year-old was a native of Gulfport, Mississippi.
This week's Gulf States Gumbo was produced by me, Joseph King. Our head chef this week is Stephan Bisaha. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your room.